Mark Truex Jr. will likely return to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2024, and it sounds like NASCAR is hoping to run the Chicago Street Course once again in 2024, and they tend to go through their 3-year deal. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We'll go ahead by starting talking about Roblox, as it was announced on Friday that Roblox and NASCAR has added the Chicago track to Roblox. This is really cool to see. We got a lot of stories all around the Chicago Street Course today, but it's really cool to see the Chicago Street Course has been added to Roblox. I think that's really exciting, really awesome to see, and love the fact that they've added the Chicago Street Track to Roblox. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Kip Childress. As he reported and announced last night that Kip Childress will no longer be doing any more races past the Chicago Street Course, as he has announced retirement after committing his time to NASCAR for 15 years. Absolutely well-earned retirement. Kip Childress has done an amazing job. I think he's been the pace car driver and working with NASCAR for a very long time. So amazing stuff to see that Kip Childress is going to retire. It sucks he is retiring, but he's had an incredible career in the sport. Congratulations on a great career, Kip, and glad to see that you get to retire on your own terms. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott. And now, last night on social media, we've obviously saw that Shane Van Gisbergen picked up his first career NASCAR Cup Series victory in his NASCAR debut. And multiple drivers did praise him, including Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott on social media. Kyle Larson saying congratulations to Shane Van Gisbergen, and Chase Elliott basically saying the same thing. I think a lot of drivers do know very well how good of a driver Shane Van Gisbergen is, and I think a lot of drivers in the industry are very happy to see Shane Van Gisbergen pick up the victory. I think it was really cool to see Larson and Chase give congratulations to Shane. Well-deserved win for Shane Van Gisbergen. Huge congratulations to him on picking up the victory, and glad to see the praise that he is getting. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Bubba Wallace and Denny Hamlin. Now, last night on social media, both Denny Hamlin and Bubba Wallace thanked Chicago for all the support over the weekend. Now, we'll talk about the Chicago street race and the pros and cons later in this episode, but it's really cool to see Bubba Wallace and Denny Hamlin. Obviously, Bubba Wallace has been doing a lot of promotion with Chicago over the last week, so he was really thankful. The fan says he wished he could have done a better job out on the racetrack, and Denny Hamlin also thanking Chicago as well for what they were able to do. There's a lot of accomplishments with this event, and nonetheless, congratulations. It's a pretty decent event overall. We'll talk about the overall event a little bit later in this episode, but nonetheless, great to see Bubba Wallace, Denny Hamlin supportive of the event. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Loop 2121. Now, we'll talk about decision here shortly, but Joseph Sturgley, who does a really good thing when it comes to Sprigley stats, he reports a lot of his stats. And according to him, the Loop 21 only had 25 laps complete. That is the least amount of distance complete in Xfinity Series history, of only completing 55 miles. Obviously, Xfinity Series race got called early, but it's just wild to see that is the shortest Xfinity Series race in NASCAR history, in the 41-year history of the Xfinity Series. That's incredible to see, and wild to see that the Loop 2121 had the shortest race in NASCAR Xfinity Series history when it comes to distance. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about the Xfinity Series once again, as we're going to talk about the decision made. Now, NASCAR actually had postponed the Xfinity Series race to yesterday. However, due to the amount of rain that actually hit the racetrack, they decided to go ahead and call it early, despite the fact they had not reached halfway or the end of stage number 2, which usually you have to get to halfway, which I think was lap 28 or 29, or the end of stage 2, which I believe was lap 30. NASCAR made the decision to go ahead and call it early. Now, apparently in the NASCAR rulebook, there is extreme circumstances to one of the reasons why I would call a race early like this, and Cole Custer picked up the victory. Look, I understand a lot of fans are upset with NASCAR about the decision. I do agree. I do wish they would have gotten all the way through with the race overall, but I understand NASCAR's decision. Look, city races are completely different. Apparently, when it comes to the city, apparently with Chicago, it's much different. There are lightning delays. Apparently, instead of being a 30-minute delay, it's a 90-minute delay, and they have to evacuate the park. There's not much production, so it does make a little bit of sense, so I don't completely agree with that. I understand that NASCAR had to make a really difficult call and a really difficult decision. It sucks. I do wish they would have gotten halfway, maybe even pacing. Feel like it would have been a good thing, even though a lot of people would have called spot Spa 2021, but let's be honest, it does already feel like Spa 2021 regardless. So just a disappointing situation overall. It's in the rulebook, though, the extreme circumstances, and obviously they were really close to halfway. They said basically if only 2 laps to halfway, they were like, you know what, we're not going to finish this race. We're not going to get to halfway. We're just going to go ahead and call it. So it's a disappointing decision overall. I understand, though, and it's just unfortunate what happened. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Cup race as well with their decisions. So about 35, 40 laps to go in the race, I think a lap 46 or 47, NASCAR decided to finally make the call to go ahead and shorten the race. Due to the race being delayed an hour, NASCAR cut the race from 100 laps to 75 laps. Now, why it took NASCAR this long to make that call, I really don't know and understand. I do feel like they should have made the decision maybe a little bit sooner. But the reason they called it, like I said early, is because of darkness. And people think, well, they have street lights. Well, street lights are not enough to illuminate the track. And I'm a little surprised they didn't bring LED lights into the track. But still, it is what it is in that decision. Now, I think it was the right call to make it a little early. I wish they would have made it a little bit earlier, maybe like on lap 30 or something, said we're going to shorten the race to maybe 75 or 80 laps, which they did shorten to 75 laps. But again, I think with it being a later start time and the weather, regardless how you feel if they want earlier start times, even though we'll talk about that here a little bit, I will say I think NASCAR did a decent job here trying to get the race in, and they still got 75 laps, and they actually went to overtime, so they got, 77 or 78 laps anyway, so they nearly got 80 laps in this race, but that's the reason NASCAR made a decision. They felt like that the guy also got up front with the strategy, and to be fair, Shane Van Gisbergen and Kyle Larson did get up front with the victory, and they still had a shot to potentially go out there and win the race. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Shane Van Gisbergen once again. Now, I believe it was reported by Josh Hamilton on Twitter that Shane Van Gisbergen is only the 6th driver born outside of the United States to win a NASCAR Cup Series race. The other 5 drivers are Marcus Ambrose, who won at Watkins Glen in 2011 and 2012, Juan Montoya won at Sonoma in 2007 and Watkins Glen in 2010, Earl Ross, who won at Martinsville in 1974, Mario Andretti, who won the 1967 Daytona 500, and Daniel Suarez, who won at Sonoma in 2022. Shane Van Gisbergen, absolutely incredible drive. He's also the first driver from the continent to win, like I said, since Marcus Ambrose back in 2012 at Watkins Glen. He's the first New Zealander, actually, to win in NASCAR history as well. Absolutely well-deserved win for Shane Van Gisbergen. Incredible to see that he was able to join a long statistic of really awesome drivers who were able to pick up the victory. Absolutely congratulations to him on picking up a very awesome victory. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Austrian Grand Prix. Now, yesterday had a lot of racing going on, including the Austrian Grand Prix. And this race, no surprise, was dominated by Max Verstappen once again, who I believe picked up his 5th consecutive F1 victory. And also Max Verstappen has extended his championship. I will say this race was a lot more interesting, though, than normal for Formula 1. He had a lot of strategy. A caution came out earlier. A safety car came out early due to Yuki Tsunoda. And it changed up the strategy, and it was a little more of a race than we all thought. Charles Leclerc actually had a shot at points to beat him, but Max Verstappen's car was so dominant that it was going to be really tough to beat him unless a safety car came into play. But nonetheless, Max Verstappen now has a 79-point lead over the rest of the competition, and it's going to be very unlikely at this point that Max Verstappen loses their championship. He could lock the championship up 3 races early, which is absolutely incredible. A dominating season nonetheless. But a lot of people also got penalized for, I think, cutting corners or track limits. I think 83 track limit penalties came in the race, which is absolutely wild. But nonetheless, getting off that, congratulations to Max Verstappen on picking up the victory. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the IndyCar race at Mid-Ohio. Now, you had the IndyCar race that took place at Mid-Ohio, and it was a very interesting race. However, once again, for the 2nd consecutive race in a row, the 3rd consecutive race in a row, actually, Alex Poe picked up the victory. Alex Poe, after picking up the win, is now 110 points ahead of, I think, 2nd place was either Joseph Newgarden at this point, or Scott Dixon, or Marcus Ericsson, because Marcus Ericsson had a really, really bad and a struggling race. In my opinion, pretty solid race overall. His races early, dominated by Colton Herta and Graham Rahal early. Unfortunately, they had issues on pit road, and also I think he got a speeding penalty on pit road as well. But Alex Poe, he is on an incredible stretch of his career. At this point, why is Alex Poe considering going to Formula 1? Because at this point, unless you're going to go to Formula 1, why would you leave Chip Ganassi? You're having a dominating season. He's won 4 of the last 5 races, and he could have won the Indy 500 too, and could have won 5 straight races. This is one of the most dominant performances we have ever seen in a driver in IndyCar in a long time. I know Scott Dixon won the first 2 races in 2020, but just to see what Alex Palou is doing is absolutely amazing and absolutely incredible. So nonetheless, huge congratulations to Alex Palou on picking up the victory. A well-earned and a well-deserved win for Alex Palou, and a dominating day for him as well. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Ken Schrader. As it was announced on Friday afternoon that Ken Schrader will be going full-time in the SRX in 2023. Now, I do believe Ken Schrader did make one start in the SRX last year at I-55 Raceway, my hometown track. But it's very exciting to see that Ken Schrader is going to be full-time in the SRX in 2023, as I think Ken Schrader will have a decent chance and a shot to be very, very competitive. But he joins a long list of drivers who are going to be in the SRX in 2023. You've got Tony Stewart full-time, Haley Deegan's full-time, Brad Keselowski's full-time this year. You've got Joseph Newgarden driving in a couple races. I think Marco Andretti might be back this year. Ryan Newman's going to be running full-time. Obviously, like I mentioned, Tony Stewart. You've got Kyle Busch running a few races this year. You got Kevin Harvick running 1 or 2 races. Clint Bowyer's running a race this year. You got Julio Castroneves running 2 or 3 races this year. And you've got a lot of other drivers who could have an opportunity to come into play. I would like to see maybe Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, or Bubba Wallace, or maybe even Dale Jr., Jeff Gordon come and race in the SRX. But it's just, and also Casey Kane, Denny Hamlin. You've got Matt Kenseth running a race or 2. It is really exciting to see all these drivers who are running the SRX this year, and it's just really exciting nonetheless to see that Ken Schrader is going to be full-time. I think Ken Schrader does have a shot and a potential opportunity to be very, very competitive, and I think he could have a very good season in the SRX in 2023. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about Project 91. Now, Justin Marks is speaking to media after the NASCAR Cup Series race after they won with Project 91. And according to Justin Marks, he says Project 91 doesn't have any more races scheduled at this point for Project 91 in 2023. But I think after winning the most recent race, it would not surprise or shock me if Shane Van Gisbergen does get another shot and another opportunity to drive in that car, because that was one of the most incredible things I have ever seen. And it's disappointing right now at this point that Project 91 doesn't have another race scheduled. Their rumors they're going to run the Daytona 500 Julio Castroneves, but unfortunately those talks kind of fell through due to sponsorship and funding and other factors, and also having lack of experience on those type of tracks. But I do say that I hope Project 91 does run more races in 2023, because I think the racing was really, really good for this team, and they've had a lot of success. I know Kimi Räikkönen kind of struggled with Project 91, but I do believe that they should run the Indy Road Course, bring out someone, I don't know, maybe like Kimi Räikkönen back, maybe they bring out Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, maybe they bring an IndyCar driver like a Scott McLaughlin we'll talk about here in a little bit, maybe let him drive Project 91. What about Juan Pablo Montoya? I think Juan Montoya, who interestingly Trackhouse bought the Chip Ganassi Racing Organization, and Juan Montoya drove for Chip Ganassi for many, many years. Why not have Juan Montoya drive the car? It'd be very interesting to see what Project 91 can do after the win, but overall, a really awesome day and a massive day for Project 91. It's a little disappointing they're not potentially going to run more races this year, but I think if they don't run, it is what it is overall. But I do hope there's an opportunity and a chance to maybe see Project 91 maybe run some more races in the future this year. I think Indy Road Course, maybe they run some more oval races, and maybe, just maybe, in 2024, this car could run a lot more races. But it sounds like right now the plan is to not run any more races, at least at this foreseeable moment. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the drivers' reaction to the Chicago Street Course. Now, coming this weekend, a lot of drivers are very, very skeptical of the Chicago Street event. But a lot of drivers had a lot of really great things to say about this event. Denny Hamlin had a lot of praise and was really, really happy about the event overall. And Denny Hamlin also said that was a happy he had been being at a racetrack. After, of course, winning the pole for the Cup Series race at the Chicago Street Course, Denny Hamlin was very, very happy. Chase Elliott also was very, very pleasantly surprised and was also very happy about how the event had gone as well. Also, Kevin Harvick was actually also pleasantly surprised as well with how the event had gone as well. Overall, I think the drivers had a lot of positive things to say. I think Kyle Busch, another driver, also had something really, really positive to say about the event overall. It's a shame what happened with all the other stuff we'll get into a little bit later. But overall, I think a lot of drivers are very happy about things we're going with this event overall. And nonetheless, it's good to see the drivers are really happy about Chicago Street Course. And I think the future street racing could have a really good future going forward. But overall, it's good to see the drivers have some pretty decent opinions about the event. And glad to see they had some really positive things. I imagine Denny Hamlin on his Actions Detrimental podcast is likely going to have some things to say about the event, probably in a positive way more than a negative way. But nonetheless, I love the fact to see that drivers are giving some pretty awesome and great opinions about the Chicago Street Course event. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Ryan Blaney. Now, Ryan Blaney spoke to the media this past weekend in regards to the crash at Nashville. Obviously, if you watched the race at Nashville Superspeedway on Sunday evening last week, you saw that Ryan Blaney crashed in the inside wall really, really hard, and basically was concrete that he hit. And he actually says that he experienced concussion-like symptoms after his crash at Nashville. He consulted with renowned concussion specialist Dr. Mickey Collins, who's worked with a lot of drivers, including Dale Jr., on rehab exercises, and by later this week was feeling 100% by the end of the week. It's really good to see that Ryan Blaney was able to race this weekend, obviously feeling concussion-like symptoms. I am a little surprised they didn't have a driver ready to go. I imagine they would have had backup drivers ready to go in case a situation like this where Ryan Blaney could not race. And I was very worried that Ryan Blaney was not going to be able to race this weekend. But it was very good to see Ryan Blaney out on the racetrack. But it's the thing with this next-gen car and concrete barriers. The fact he's experienced concussion-like symptoms on a concrete barrier is just completely unacceptable. And something's got to change about that area of the track. In my personal opinion, I do believe that they need to figure out a way to have more basically like safety barriers or tire barriers there. And also the next-gen car does need some work, especially when it comes to safety, because there's been issues with the safety of the next-gen car. And that's something that does need to be worked on going forward. But it was great to see Ryan Blaney out on the racetrack. Obviously, I was very worried that he wasn't going to race. I was a little worried he wasn't going to race, but it got to Thursday and Friday. He basically said that he was going to be racing. I'm really happy he got able to race. I know concussion like symptoms something you got to take very, very seriously. Obviously, a lot of drivers had their careers ended because of stuff like that. Kurt Busch, unfortunately, had his career ended due to concussion like symptoms, or full-time career, I should say, because he's trying to get back to the NASCAR garage for 2024. Now, obviously, Carl Edwards, he retired because of injuries like this, even though Carl has been hinting he might come back in the future. But overall, glad to see Ryan Blaney back at the racetrack. And disappointing stuff to hear that basically he was almost couldn't even race. It's disappointing news with what happened, but glad to see Ryan Blaney was out at the racetrack. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the next-gen car. Now, Steve O'Donnell spoke to the media this past week and actually spoke yesterday after the Cup Series race, and he says a lot of the next-gen car's roots and a lot of stuff revolving around the next-gen car actually comes from Australian supercars. I think that's a huge reason why we saw Shane Van Gisbergen do an incredible and amazing job. But a lot of the talk about the next-gen car is a lot of the inspiration for this next-gen car came from V8 supercars, the Australian supercars, and also from some of the GT racing as well. And I think it's really cool to see that basically some guys from supercars probably could do really well in this. In fact, I think a lot of drivers who come from supercars, stuff like a Brody Kostecki perhaps could come over, maybe like a Jamie Whincup, he came out of retirement, Jimmy Whincup. I think that's the name, if I'm not mistaken. I might have gotten that wrong. But basically, it really is cool to see that the next-gen car is getting some stuff from V8 supercars, and I think it worked very, very well to advantage of certain drivers. And overall, I love the fact that NASCAR did take some inspiration from the V8 supercars, and it does look like a V8 supercar in my opinion. It looks like a stock car, look really, really fun, and I think it helped with the racing overall. But it's really cool to see that NASCAR took some inspiration from that. I think it's really awesome and really cool to see, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about another comment from Steve O'Donnell, and it revolves around global racing. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the future of global racing in NASCAR, and Steve O'Donnell actually spoke to media in regards to that. Steve O'Donnell feels confident after the street race that we can take the Cup Series anywhere across the globe. Obviously, after the success of the project, basically the project Garage 56 entry and the success of this event overall, obviously Garage 56 at Le Mans, how successful that was and how much they're looking to maybe get some new manufacturers from Europe going into the future. But obviously, NASCAR has been talking about potentially going global. Obviously, there's a lot of rumors, and it sounds like it's very likely at this point that we're going to be racing in Montreal heading into the 2024 season, though that has not been officially announced. Now it's very likely that is going to replace the Auto Club weekend, and we're going to be starting to race globally in the future. But NASCAR has obviously talked about potentially racing in the Middle East, potentially racing in Europe, and maybe racing in another country like India going into the future. There's been a lot of talk about that. And I think this next gen car has been able to do a lot of crazy things. We would not have been able to race at the LA Coliseum and do the Busch Clash in a Coliseum if not for the next gen car. We wouldn't have been able to go to Le Mans if not for the next gen car, and we would not have been able to run this race in Chicago if not for the next gen car. And IndyCar probably would have struggled, or even GT racing would have struggled as well. I think it's just overall so cool to see what this next gen car is being able to provide. There's been definitely a lot of negatives with the next gen car. There's no doubt about that, but I think that the positives do somewhat outweigh the negatives. Obviously, safety's been an issue with this car, but I love the fact that we're looking toward the future, and global racing could be something to watch for in the not so distant future. I love racing, it's fun, and I love the fact that they're already discussing about the future. If I had to choose, let's start in North America, let's start in Canada, let's start in Mexico. Those are the two countries that could have an opportunity to come on a schedule in the 2024 season. But I do love the fact that NASCAR is having conversations in regards to that. I love that there's potentially racing we could do in the future, go global racing, and overall, I do hope we get an opportunity to race in different areas of the world, maybe in the not so distant future, because I think that would be really, really good for the sport and really, really fun. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Scott McLaughlin. Now, I think I've talked about this on the channel once, or if you watch my silly season updates, you've probably heard me talk about Scott McLaughlin and his interest in NASCAR. And once again, he was basically watching the Chicago street race, and he's really good friends with Shane Van Gisbergen. And apparently, Scott McLaughlin has expressed some interest in potentially wanting to race in NASCAR, maybe in next year's Chicago street race event if it does come back, or maybe in more NASCAR races as well. Now, Scott McLaughlin is also, while he is an IndyCar driver, has won quite a few IndyCar races in his career. I think he's won 4 IndyCar races in his career up to this point. Scott McLaughlin is a champion of V8 supercars, and the next gen car, like I talked about a second ago, is basically takes a lot of its inspiration basically from V8 supercars the next gen car does. And I think Scott McLaughlin is one of the most talented drivers I have seen come into racing in general over the last 10 to 15 years. And I think he could win an IndyCar championship in the future as well. But I think Scott McLaughlin racing in NASCAR would be really, really fun and really, really great to see. And I think it would be huge for the sport if Scott McLaughlin got the shot and opportunity to race in NASCAR. And I do believe that, I know it's probably a bold take, but I do believe Scott McLaughlin could honestly go out and win in his debut. If he's in a competitive car and a competitive entry, I think he would go out there and win, especially if it's Project 91, which I think Team Penske would absolutely allow him to go and do it. I think that he would have an opportunity, maybe like in the end of the season, if they decide to do some oval racing, because he's been really good with ovals as well. He's almost won some races at ovals. Go back to Texas in 2021 when he almost won there. I think that Scott McLaughlin's an incredible talent. He's an incredible driver, and having him in NASCAR would be absolutely huge. And I think Project 91 has opened up a can of worms of potentially giving an opportunity to Scott McLaughlin in the future. Getting 1 or 2 starts in the future would be very, very exciting. I hope he gets an opportunity, and I hope he gets a shot to potentially race in NASCAR in the foreseeable future. Hopefully, he gets a shot and an opportunity to do that, because I think it'd be really fun and really, really good for the sport overall. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Shane Van Gisbergen once again. Now, obviously, we've already said this a couple times, but Shane Van Gisbergen, of course, picked up his first career NASCAR Cup Series victory in his first career start. He becomes the first driver since Johnny Rutherford in 1963 when he won at Daytona to win in his NASCAR Cup Series debut, and he's the first driver in the modern era to win. Now, there's been a lot of talk conversations about the future of Shane Van Gisbergen. We talked about it last week, but Shane Van Gisbergen has expressed interest in potentially wanting to race in NASCAR full-time. He said to the media last night after winning that he has 1 more year left racing in V8 supercars and the Repco Supercar Series heading into 2024, and he could potentially join NASCAR heading into 2025. But with him winning the race at Chicago Street Course, could this potentially speed up the process of him coming to NASCAR, maybe as early as 2024? We'll have to wait and see, but I really do hope that Shane Van Gisbergen gets to go full-time in NASCAR, because I think Shane Van Gisbergen not only has a fantastic personality, but he brings a lot of international presence and that really awesome international audience as well, especially from Australia, because you're going to have a lot of those fans from Australia who are going to tune in. I think Shane Van Gisbergen is one of the most incredible and most talented drivers I have seen come into racing in the last 20 years. And he beat some really, really awesome and great drivers. Guys like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Brad Keselowski, and Joey Logano, Kevin Harvick. A lot of guys have been champions and winners in the sport. Denny Hamlin as well, and even Jenson Button. He beat a lot of really talented and really gifted drivers in this sport. And I really would love to see Shane Van Gisbergen have an opportunity to run full-time. I think he would be a contender for wins, especially on road courses and street courses. I think he would be absolutely a contender. But if you're Justin Marks in Project 91, this guy has to run the Indy road course race. I would imagine that they're probably having discussions about maybe having Shane probably come back later this year and run with this team. Because if you're Shane Van Gisbergen, if he can win in his debut, which is incredible, what he was doing was absolutely impressive. And if you're NASCAR, you got to give this guy an opportunity to run. And I really hope he gets to run full-time in NASCAR as early as 2024. It sounds like he's going to run V8 next year. But I want this guy to run full-time in NASCAR. I've been saying it for a while. This guy's one of the most incredible talents I've seen come into racing. And if he comes and runs full-time in NASCAR, I think he's going to do an amazing and an incredible job. So will he come in 2024? Probably not, but it sounds like 2025 could be the earliest, but we could see him run IMSA full-time. He's raced in the United States before in IMSA in the Porsches back in the day in the Rolex 24. Could see him in IndyCar as well. I could see IndyCar teams looking at him. Maybe, just maybe, we could see Justin Marks open up Trackhouse Racing's IndyCar team and maybe potentially put a guy like basically put Shane Van Gisbergen in. And I think Shane would do an amazing and a very, very good job. But I think this has opened up a can of worms for the future. Shane Van Gisbergen, he's an amazing talent. He's a great driver. Hopefully Shane Van Gisbergen gets an opportunity and a shot to race in NASCAR full-time in the future, because I think he would do an amazing and a very, very good job, in my honest and sincere opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about city racing. Now, there's a couple stories in regards to street racing going into the future, but the first one came out on Friday, and according to Adam Stern, NASCAR is already holding talks with other series about possibly new street races per Ben Kenny. By no means does that mean that we are going to add a bunch of street races to the schedule, but having a couple is in the conversations. Now, talking about the future of street racing itself, I thought the Chicago street race itself does have a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. But I do agree with Ben Kenny. I don't want to see the schedule completely flooded with street races, because historically, when it comes to NASCAR, when they have something that goes really, really well once, they tend to flood the schedule with it, especially road courses. They usually only have 2 or 3 road courses on the schedule, and technically street courses and road courses are technically different. NASCAR overflooded the schedule back in 2021 and went from 2 or 3 road course races up to 6 road course races, and I think that overall is a little bit over extreme, a little bit way too much in my honest opinion. I think 1 street race a year or 2 at the most is probably how much I would go, in my opinion. I think NASCAR is going to add more street races in the future. I think that they are going to, but if they do add any more, where could they go to? Well, there's a lot of potential areas that this could open up. What about racing in Pittsburgh? Obviously, Pittsburgh's been one of the cities that almost got an opportunity to have a NASCAR Cup Series race for the future. They've talked about wanting to maybe have some IndyCar races as well. Pittsburgh is an area that I look at as an area that is not really looked at as demographic. I can see Pittsburgh having an opportunity. What about Seattle? Seattle's an area that doesn't have racing up there. I know Portland's kind of close there, but Seattle, I imagine, could have an opportunity to have some street racing in the future. Obviously, weather could be an issue with that because it's cooler up in Seattle, so maybe Seattle gets an opportunity shot. What about Denver, Colorado? NASCAR's had conversations about maybe going to Denver. They were talking about as early as 2021 and maybe going to Denver. I can see Denver having a shot and an opportunity to maybe get a city. And then you think about other areas of the country, maybe or other world, like Mexico City. Mexico City could host a street race in the future, though they do have Autodromo Rodriguez down there in Mexico that F1 runs, and NASCAR used to run from 2005 to 2008. So Mexico City could be an option. What about the streets of Toronto? IndyCar runs in Toronto. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Penny Series races in the streets of Toronto as well. I could see Toronto having an opportunity shot, and you can get that Canadian audience as well. And then you have other areas of the country, like New York City could have a street race in the future. Maybe a city like Buffalo could be an opportunity. I think this is actually New Orleans as well. I know people have mentioned New Orleans, and even Alan McCarr has been kind of asking NASCAR to have a race basically in New Orleans. I think that this has opened up a lot of possibilities for the future. Even that Miami Street Course could be a possibility as well. But I think the future street racing is going to be interesting, and I think you're going to see more street races in the future, whether you like it or not. But like I said, let's not overflood the schedule. I think 1 is the minimum. I think 2 is the maximum. If you go more than 2, I think a lot of drivers are going to get frustrated. A lot of fans are going to get tired of the racing. A lot of fans don't want the schedule to be overflooded. I want the schedule to be diverse. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about it. We'll have to wait and see what NASCAR does decide to do in regards to that. But if you want my honest and sincere opinion, there should only be 1 street race on the schedule or 2 at the most. That's it. If they add too many more street races, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. It's going to be way too many street races. So we'll see what happens. But it sounds like right now there's talk that they could add more street races, but we'll see what NASCAR does decide to do. Obviously, the schedule is expected to be out sometime in late August, early September. And we'll talk about street course in a second, but it sounds like that the schedule will be out in the next couple months. And street race, we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that future. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we are talking about the Chicago Street Course. Now, before the Chicago Street Course took the green flag and the event even happened, there was an article that came out from Adam Stern. Adam Stern reports that a new mayor in Chicago means it's less than fully clear whether the city intends to stick with the original 3-year plan for NASCAR Chicago. But Ben Kenney said that for its part, NASCAR is preparing for next year. This is not shock or surprising. Obviously, NASCAR does have a 3-year contract currently with the city, which every street race technically has a 3-year deal. You look at IndyCar, the Nashville event, basically has a 3-year deal where it ends at the end of 2023. Now, before this weekend, I would have said there was no chance and no possibility this event was going to go past 2023. But I do believe, we've obviously seen Brandon Johnson actually be a little more happy with this event overall. I do think that this event overall does have a chance and possibility to come back in 2024. Now, let's talk about the positives and the negatives of the event overall, and I think, in my verdict on this event. Number 1, I think the event itself was actually going very, very well. The concerts were really, really hyped up to be really, really great. There have been a lot of people really enjoying the event overall. Unfortunately, weather came into play and dampened this event overall. I think the Cup Series race overall did save this event from being a complete disaster because before the Cup race happened, this event was overall becoming a very, very big disaster. But I do believe the Cup Series race did save this event overall. And we saw a pretty solid and really, really good race. And I was really skeptical coming to weekend. I thought this was going to be a complete disaster. But I think this race overall did exceed my expectations. It did go a lot better than I think a lot of us did end up expecting. And I think if Brandon Johnson's happy with the event, I do think this event will come back 2024. Obviously, lawmakers are going to be a key thing, and you got to look at politicians, and that's going to be a huge key thing going forward for the street race if it's going to last past 2023. Now, if it doesn't come back past 2023, where could NASCAR go to? Well, they could go to more street races. Talked about a second ago that NASCAR's had conversations of street course races about coming on a schedule, racing in Pittsburgh, racing like in New Orleans, perhaps, Seattle, racing other parts of the country, like maybe San Francisco, perhaps, maybe racing the streets of Los Angeles could be a potential possibility. If they can't get a street race, you have Chicagoland that's right there. Now, obviously, Chicagoland, they've been around the track racing. For what I've heard, Chicagoland's been rumbled and rumored about potentially being on a schedule again in the future. Now, obviously, Chicagoland is ready to go. They're not destroying the track. They're going to be hosting events. I think they're going to be doing some motocross racing in a couple months from now there. So that could be a potential possibility if they can't get back to the street course in 2024. And then you obviously have Road America that lost its date. There were 100,000 fans that were showing up to the second year of the event, and I think Road America deserves another shot and an opportunity to be on the schedule once again. But if you want my honest opinion, I do believe the street course is going to come back in 2024. NASCAR's put a lot of work into this event. They did, in my opinion, the best they could with the situation they had. Obviously, the rain dampened it. You can't be mad at NASCAR. Obviously, the only thing I will criticize NASCAR for the Xfinity Series race is the fact they could have started the race a little bit earlier, moved stuff up a little bit earlier. I don't understand why the Xfinity Series race couldn't have started maybe like an hour earlier because they would have gotten the whole thing in probably if that hadn't happened. But it is what it is overall in that situation. Sometimes you can't control the weather. It was unfortunate to see it basically have its issues again because I think that this event had a lot of hype around it, and there was a lot of things, like I said, that were going very, very well for the event, but unfortunately a lot of things just did end up going wrong, and it sucks because I think this event was going extremely well and was doing very, very fascinating and doing very, very good at this point. So I think it will come back next year. I think it's very likely that it will return, but the big question is going to be the lawmakers, and NASCAR will have to have a backup plan ready to go. And I think NASCAR, like I said, when it comes to street course racing, they are already having conversations with other cities. We discussed that a second ago, and they have been having discussions with other cities. The big question is going to be, will this event come back in 2024? We'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to the future of this event, but it does sound like that they're already having conversations about trying to come back. I think it does have a shot of potentially coming back heading into 2024, but we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to the future of the street course event. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Martin Truex Jr. and silly season. As it's been reported and it's expected at this point, but it's very likely that Martin Truex Jr. is going to return to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2024. Jordan Bianchi was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio not too long ago, and he basically told the media, and basically he was on SiriusXM, and he basically said that if Martin Truex Jr. is happy and enjoying life, which he has been enjoying recently, he will likely come back in 2024. If you would have told me at the beginning of the season that Martin Truex Jr. was going to come back in the 2024 season, I probably would have said no, because a lot of us thought that there was stuff going on, but things have changed in Martin Truex Jr.'s personal life, and Martin Truex Jr. has been having a lot more fun. And this season so far, Martin Truex Jr. has been extremely successful. He's already scored 2 wins, technically 3 if you count the Busch Light Clash, and Martin Truex Jr. has been up front. And like I said, Martin Truex Jr. is enjoying life a lot more, which I think really, really helps in decision for him to likely come back next year. If you're in Joe Gibbs Racing's position, this is really, really good for you because when you look at JGR, Denny Hamlin, he's likely going to be coming back heading in 2024. FedEx is likely to return to JGR and sign a multi-year contract extension as a sponsor heading into 2024. So that's really, really big news there that Denny Hamlin's likely to come back, which I think is huge for Cristobal and Ty Gibbs because you're going to have that veteran presence around. Though Cristobal next year will be in his fifth full-time NASCAR Cup Series season and will be around the age of 30 years old. But Ty Gibbs will only be 21 years old or 22 at the start of the 2024 season. But if Martin Truex Jr. doesn't return to JGR in 2024, what happens basically to the 19 car of the 11? Well, I think that John Hunter Nemechek would become the initial favorite to take over that 19 car heading into the 2024 season. That would be the likely driver who would take over that car. But like I said, going back and talking about Martin Truex Jr., I think it's very likely that he's going to come back in 2024. Which begs the question when it comes to silly season, what's going to happen with the rest of silly season? Obviously, like I said, Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex Jr. are likely going to come back. It's been reported that likely the 10 car, the Eric Almirola, could retire at the end of the 2023 season. And right now, the Zane Smith and Michael McDowell are the 2 current favorite drivers who could end up driving that car in 2024. Zane Smith does have a multi-year deal with Front Row. I think that goes through 2025 or 26, and he does have a contract for right now through 2026. Michael McDowell is a year-by-year basis, so he could potentially drive that number 10 car in 2024. He's my pick right now for the 10, but things can change. But Zane Smith continues to be a name brought up. You've also got Todd Gillen who could get an opportunity, maybe Haley Deegan, maybe Matt DiBenedetto as well could have an opportunity there. Then you look at 23XI Racing. They've got that 3rd car. Obviously, Kurt Busch, he wants to come back very, very soon. He's been trying to make a return to NASCAR. Carl Edwards, he's shown some interest, and maybe he could drive the 3rd 23XI Racing car. The 67 car, we got Kamui Kobayashi. He's going to be driving that at the Indy Road Course. I definitely think Carl Edwards has an opportunity to drive that. You've obviously got other teams that we're uncertain about. Junior Motorsports, they're trying to get the Cup full-time next year. Spire Motorsports, we know in the future. That team currently at the moment right now, obviously we know that Corey LaJoie is likely coming back, though. We've heard rumors that Trackhouse wants to expand to 3 full-time operations in the future, and if they were to expand, Corey could be a potential favorite for that 3rd Trackhouse car, though I will say it sounds like he's likely to return to Spire. Harrison Burton is likely going to return to the Wood Brothers heading into 2024, though I will say that we don't know at this point. Dex imaging is a big factor, and also they could move their wells way elsewhere and maybe go into the 10 car next year. You got Josh Berry, we know is going to be driving the 4 car, but transitioning back to Joe Gibbs Racing and Martin Truex Jr. Martin Truex Jr. could return for a few years. I think that MTJ will likely sign at least maybe a 2-3 year, maybe a 1 or 2 year extension. I think he at least will sign a 1-year deal through 2024. But I think Martin Truex Jr. definitely is getting near to the end of his NASCAR Cup Series career. I think MTJ's basically got about 2 or 3 years left at the most, and I think he will fall off eventually. But he's having a career resurgence, and he's really been really good this year. I know Chicago did not go well for Martin Truex Jr., but I think MTJ overall is just an amazing and incredible job as a NASCAR Cup Series driver, and overall just this year has been great for him. 2 wins, and I think he's got a chance to really win this championship. Toyota's got great pace and great speed, and I think that Mark Truex Jr. will be an absolute threat to win the championship, and I hope they can get this contract stuff out of the way so that Mark Truex Jr. can return. Anything's possible. Mark Truex Jr. may decide, you know what, I don't want to come back heading into 2024, but at this point, I think NTJ is going to come back and race in 2024, and I think that'll be really, really good and really huge for this team. I think Mark Truex Jr. returns to the 19. I think Denny Hamlin also will come back to 11. I think with the HBSC acquisition of the team, having a minority stake in the team, FedEx is a big factor with the Washington Commanders at this point. So I do believe that we're going to see Denny Hamlin and Mark Truex Jr. come back. It sounds like he will return heading into 2024, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. So that is going to today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, hit the channel notifications on to get notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's video. Do you think Mark Truex Jr. returns to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2024 or not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And do you think Chicago Street Course comes back in 2024? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I will have more video later on the channel today. Obviously, we'll talk about the Truck Series race picks for Mid-Ohio coming up. Then tomorrow on the channel, the Xfinity Series race picks for Atlanta Motor Speedway. And if any major NASCAR news breaks, we'll talk about that here on the channel. Then on Wednesday, there should be a NASCAR news video dropping on the channel. If any major news breaks, we'll discuss that. Then on Thursday, will be race picks for the Cup race at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Friday will be a NASCAR news video. And then Saturday, we'll have the Xfinity and Truck Series race reviews. And then Sunday, of course, we'll have the Cup Series race review from Atlanta as well. Got a lot of content dropping. We're getting closer to the playoffs, and we're also getting close to 2,000 subscribers. So if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.